They're not fast, they're not glamorous, and they're not sophisticated, but they are fun. In fact, tiny little pocket rockets like the VW Up GTI and the Suzuki Swift Sport are among my favourite kinds of car, regardless of price. Question is, which one is best? Before we get into it though, have you subscribed to the CarGurus YouTube channel yet? We post new and used car reviews, helping you work out which car is right for you. Go on, tap that subscribe button. Very small hot hatches like these should be a few things. They should be affordable to buy, nippy in a straight line, usable day to day, and above all else, fun to drive. A Suzuki Swift Sport, a much earlier version, was the very first performance car that I ever lived with. I had one for 6 months. I adored it. That was more than a decade ago, and since then, the Swift Sport has grown in size and cost. As of this year, it's a hybrid too. It's not a plug-in hybrid and it doesn't have any electric-only range, but it's a hybrid nonetheless. It now has 127 brake horsepower, the engine a 1.4-litre 4-cylinder petrol with a turbo. Suzuki says it'll hit 62 miles per hour in 9.1 seconds and run on to 130. The Up GTI has been around since late 2017, but it was taken off sale for a while for two reasons. The first was that it was actually too popular. VW couldn't keep up with demand in this right-hand drive market. It cost less than £14,000 and buyers loved it. The second is to do with emissions. When new emissions regulations came along in 2018, the Up GTI's engine had to be tweaked to make it compliant. Earlier in 2020, VW introduced this updated version. It's £2,000 more expensive and it's now emissions compliant, but otherwise the basic Up GTI recipe is unchanged. It weighs only 1,070 kilograms and its little 3-cylinder turbo engine develops 113 brake horsepower. There's no hybrid element here. VW quotes a 0 to 62 time of 8.8 seconds and a 122 mph top speed. The Up GTI isn't the bargain it once was. It now starts at £16,540. Meanwhile, the Swift Sport Hybrid is significantly more expensive at £21,570. So what about this car's cabin tells me that I'm driving a hot hatch? We've got some red stitching here, a red sweep across the dashboard here and on the doors as well, down here also. But really, it's the chunky bolsters in the seats. The seats are really supportive. I like those a lot. I remember in my old Swift Sport, the seat felt like it was mounted far too high. I'm still perched up a little bit in this chair, but it's much better than it was before. Meanwhile, the cabin quality, it's a small hatchback. There are some scratchy plastics here and there, but I think generally the build quality, the fit and finish is pretty good, and some of this switchgear feels pretty upmarket as well. The Swift Sport mightn't be a bargain hot hatch these days, but it does come very highly specified. Adaptive cruise control, a rear parking camera, keyless go, Apple CarPlay, and lots of active safety systems are all standard equipment. The Up GTI immediately feels like a smaller, more compact car than the Swift Sport when you jump inside. Again, the driver's seat mounted maybe just a little bit too high, but not criminally so. Actually, a bigger problem is the lack of any reach adjustment on the steering wheel. It means I'm constantly just stretching a little bit too far for it. Cabin quality, again, it's a very small, very affordable car, so some harder plastics here and there. That's to be expected. Generally though, again, fit and finish really good. The switchgear is all quite upmarket as well. There are also a few flourishes in here to tell you that you're driving a GTI, not least this Golf GTI style tartan upholstery on the seats and this big red specked panel across the dashboard here. The VW isn't as loaded to the headlining with kit as the Suzuki, but you do get a DAB radio, Bluetooth and heated front seats as standard. There's a smartphone mount atop the dashboard, while this reversing camera with the tiny digital display is a £440 extra. Let's begin with the Swift Sport and talk about its everyday usability attributes, because these cars would not be doing their job if they were a pain to use day to day. This thing really isn't. There's a degree of tension in the ride quality that you have to expect from a car like this, but otherwise it's just effortless to use. Actually, the ride quality is mostly pretty good. Refinement is good. It's got a 6th gear and the gearing's not stupidly short, so on the motorway the engine isn't too buzzy. Good visibility. It's just a very easy car to drive and live with day by day. Are you ever aware that it's a hybrid? No.
The hybrid system weighs 15 kilograms. That's not much at all, but any extra weight in a car like this is something to be wary of.
So does it feel any heavier? No, it really doesn't. It still feels like a very light, lively, agile car. It's more grown up than the Swift Sport I had 12 years ago, but it's still a real blast to drive. Like my old car that I had all those years ago, it's still got a lovely, agile, adjustable chassis balance. Lift off the throttle pedal sharply mid-corner and the car will begin to slide. It's such good fun. There's just as much grip as you could want. There's a really good front end on this car, just darts into corners beautifully. The steering is slightly dull, slightly muted, but you sort of get over that. More of a problem is the brake pedal. The pedal does nothing for 2 inches and then everything in 1/4 of an inch, and it's very hard to modulate because of it.
So the Swift Sport is usable every day and very entertaining on the right road. Is it nippy enough in a straight line?
Because of some very, very boring emissions regulations, this Swift Sport is now a little less powerful than it used to be. And in a car like this, every horsepower counts. Although, having said that, you don't miss the power. In fact, you don't really crave anymore because it's not that sort of car. The engine is strong, it's punchy, it's plenty powerful enough. It also revs quite nicely, it's quite energetic, at least it is until about 5,000 RPM, from where it just wilts really quickly and then it's finished before 6,000 RPM. That's a shame. I'd love it to be a more energetic, revier engine right at the top end. Throttle response though is good rich torque through the mid-range, which gives it strong performance, and the gear shift, that's lovely. Direct, it's quick, it's snicky. It's just the way it should be in a car like this.
Surprisingly, the non-hybrid Up GTI is actually 45 kilograms heavier than the Swift Sport. So how does that extra weight make itself known out on the road?
To be honest, it still feels like a very light and very small car because it is both of those things. Talking of the way it feels, when I've got my seat where I want it, I feel like I'm sat closer to the rear axle than the front. That's a very odd sensation in a front-wheel drive hot hatch. Like the Swift Sport, this car is just really easy to use every day. Yeah, like the Swift Sport, it's got a slightly tense ride, but it's not remotely uncomfortable. You've still got great visibility, steering's light, gear shift is slick and easy. Yeah, apart from it being tiny, you could live with this thing day by day very happily.
On a flowing B road, the Up GTI is in its element. It never feels at all sophisticated, but it is massively entertaining to drive.
What do I mean by that? Well, there's lots of body rolling corners. The suspension doesn't quite smother the road, so you find that the body's constantly pogoing up and down, even in a straight line. So there's a good deal that's wrong with this car, but I just don't care because it's so much fun to drive. You just drive it flat out everywhere and have a blast doing it. It's also got a much better brake pedal than the Suzuki, more instant response, and the steering is more communicative as well. When you're really hustling these cars, the Up GTI is slightly more one-dimensional than the Swift Sport. There's none of that adjustability on the throttle mid-corner that makes the Suzuki so entertaining to drive. You also can't disable the traction control in this car. But despite those things, there's not a great deal in it. It's still a great thing to drive, just like that Suzuki.
Heavier and less powerful than the Swift Sport, does the Up GTI feel outgunned in terms of performance?
You're aware that it's got slightly less power, but no, it doesn't feel outgunned at all. So what about this 3-cylinder turbo engine? Well, it's characterful. It makes a very distinctly 3-cylinder kind of thrummy sound. It sounds very distinctive. It's a good torquey engine, but a bit like the Suzuki's, it doesn't want to spin out to the red line, which seems like a pity. Still, it's a characterful thing and it's got enough performance to bring the chassis alive. And the gear shift, it's good, it's slick, it's quick, but it's not super direct or super sporty.
Both cars are great to drive and plenty quick enough. They're also usable every day, but the Up GTI is significantly cheaper to buy, £5,000 cheaper in fact.
In the final reckoning, that price differential is impossible to ignore. Both cars are great fun to drive, but the Volkswagen is so much cheaper, and that's why it wins this test. Thank you very much for watching this Car Gurus video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Remember as well to head to cargurus.co.uk, where you'll find a great deal on your next used car from a top-rated dealer.